Okay, welcome to some Scalding hot takes on the Menagerie previews. So, just where I am on these cards. I have read all these cards because I needed to make sure I understood them, like how they function, and I needed to make sure that I was going to be able to set up the video recording well enough, get it shaped. So, I need to be able to read them on my recording capture thing, which means I needed to read them. And I've read Donald's explanation of how they work, which is pretty short and rule based. Other than that, that's it. So I've spent about 5 minutes reading them, and that's my only reaction amount so far. Um, yeah, so let's just jump in. I haven't read anybody else's takes. I haven't read whatever. Let's just start talking about the cards and describing how good I think they are. And we're going to start, well, we're just going to go in order from left to right, top to bottom, with Snowy Village. Snowy Village, 3 cost, action, gives you plus a card, plus 4 actions, plus a buy. Ignore any further actions you get this turn. Yowzers, that last drawback seems, how do we say, quite bad. Quite bad. Um, except if you don't need more actions. I mean, the top part looks great, right? 4 actions is a lot. And if you don't need 4, then you're great. The problem is, if you do need anything else, you really don't want to play this early. Note that this isn't just turning off later villages, right? This is turning off like cantrips from giving you actions back. So you really don't want to play this early in a turn where you want to play a lot more actions afterwards. Um, but it's a super village, and if it didn't give you, it also gives you a buy, so it gives you that kind of market square effect. Uh, yeah, this kind of works in a deck that just doesn't have a lot of actions, but then the plus 4 actions, like it isn't very good there because you need the plus 4 actions to actually be good as well for the card to be particularly good. So we're talking about the super rare deck that wants like a bunch of terminals to where it's probably playing 2 or 3 per turn, but can't draw at all, right? If there's no draw and very few cantrips, and you want to stick your deck full of terminals, then having a few snowy villages so that you can play 2 or 3, like 3 terminals, that's just so rare. Like, if there's great thinning and some great terminal and no draw, then maybe this is good. But also, I think the more common use might be if the draw doesn't need a village, maybe even if it does, but probably if it doesn't, and there's some great payload you want to play at the end. So you draw your deck using like just cantrips or labs or something, and you have maybe a tiny bit of overdraw, so you don't need to play this to draw cards. And there isn't much in terms of other village. You use this village, you just get one of them. You just play it at the end, and then you can play your 4 terminal payload cards. Overall, I don't think it's probably very good because the end drawback is so painful, particularly to decks where the plus 4 actions is actually good. And if the drawback isn't painful, then the plus 4 actions probably isn't particularly good. I'm sure like the top part is a powerful enough effect that there will probably be situations it's good, but I don't expect it to be super often. So it's kind of niche, and I really love niche cards, so I kind of like that it exists. But let's move on to Sheepdog, which is the next card, which is just a 3 cost action reaction, which gives you plus 2 cards. And then the reaction bit is when you gain a card, you may play this from your hand. So the first thing to note is that the most common time that you're gaining cards is when you're buying cards. After you buy a card, you gain it. At that point, playing Sheepdog does not help you very much because um, at that point, drawing cards doesn't really help because you can't play cards. Except for night cards, you can't play cards at that point. I guess you could play more of these. But the point is, right, actions you draw, you can't play. And um, treasures you draw, you actually even can't play after you started buying cards. I guess the exception would be night cards, and as well as if you're gaining a villa, that's going to stick you back to the action phase. You'll be able to play stuff. So this probably combos ish with villa, although what doesn't, as well as night cards to some extent. But the other thing is if you're gaining cards other than by buying them. So what other ways are there of gaining cards? Sometimes you gain cards on your opponent's turn because your opponent makes you gain a card from embassy or governor or something, and so this is going to help you draw there, I guess. You don't even have to use the action if you're reacting this, right? Um, the other thing is if you have a gainer, so innovation style, this will let you draw cards, but that's a little bit awkward, right? Because again, you have to play the gainer before you're playing all your draw, or plus actions and stuff, which normally it's a little bit of an awkward order because normally what you do is you play all your drawing stuff, so all your actions and draw plus actions cards and plus draw cards, and only at the end play your payload unless you're overdrawing. But here you're gonna need to play the gainer, so that's going to be part of your payload, and then play some draw. You could probably fit it in, but I think it's going to want you to have a little bit more village than normal. And anyway, this doesn't seem super. I guess the flip side of needing more village than normal is you don't have to use an action to play this if you're reacting it. So that maybe just kind of balances out. Um, if you have a lot of these, then it actually saves you village space. But you're still going to need to have a village at the start so that you can play your gainer and then react multiple of these. So non-terminal gainer or a few extra villagers that you can build up at the end of a turn, like villagers, I think is going to work well with this. Again, I think this is a pretty narrow, not that strong card in general. Um, Again, I love it because it's narrow and not very strong. Let's move on. Animal Fare. +4 money, plus a buy per empty supply pile. Costs 7. But instead of paying this card's cost, you may trash an action card from your hand. So, okay. 7 is not good for this effect. I guess if there's a bunch of empty piles, then getting a bunch of buys is nice. But how are there going to be a bunch of empty piles if you're counting on this for empty buys? And if you're not counting on this for empty buys, extra buys. If you're not counting on this for extra buys, then probably getting a bunch of extra buys from this is not super important. It's going to be kind of rare for it to give you, for a lot of the game, it's just going to give you 4 money, I think. For maybe a good chunk of Sun games, it's going to give you 4 money and a buy, which is pretty nice. And then maybe occasionally it's going to give you 4 money and multiple buys, but I don't think that's going to come up very often. You don't spend a long time in many games with multiple piles empty. Um, if there are 2 piles empty and you can play a few of these, this is going to allow you to empty a third pile, like very, very high probability, kind of like City in that way, right? You play like 3 of these, you get 7 buys, and 7 buys and 12 money, you're almost emptying the estates just right there, right? So once these get activated to where they're giving you more than 1 extra buy, that's going to be super mega dangerous pile out territory. And so if you're both playing decks where you're drawing, most of your deck and using this for payload, then that is going to be something you need to watch out for, activating that far, like cities. Of course, unlike cities, after more than 2 piles are empty, these get even more active. I don't really anticipate that being much of a concern because after more than two piles are empty, the game ends at the end of that turn. So you would have had to have emptied the third pile or like be on a fleet turn to get more than two extra buys from one of these. But if you can do that, like maybe you are on a fleet turn, right? You have three empty piles or four empty piles, and you're playing a few of these, and then you have a ton of extra buys. Of course, you also need to be able to make use of all those tons and tons of extra buys. So I don't know, maybe you're gonna like empty coppers for tower seems unlikely. The most likely use that I can think of off the top of my head is scoring a ton of goons points, which if out of that many piles empty, the game is over or basically over. So spending all those extra buys for coppers to give you a couple extra points seems like a good plan. Overall, though, I think it's mostly just going to give you 0 to 1, maybe occasionally two buys, and the two buys is going to be important for uh, piling out a third pile, whether it's estates or curses. Do keep in mind the curses is a pile here, or whatever it may be. Um, I think, how good is this card? So just for money and some buys, if you're buying this card, it's just too expensive for 7, right? You can look at Wine Merchant at 5, and Wine Merchant's a fine payload card if you're drawing, but it's not even that great. Um, because, well, it gives you a little bit less money, but just, I guess the thing is, money is the least important thing for those decks to be able to get, right? Payload is kind of, you need deck control by and large, most importantly. This doesn't help your deck control whatsoever, it just gives you payload. So where I actually see this card is in money decks, right? There's plenty of actions that are good these days, and there's plenty of actions you might want to gain in your money deck as opposed to maybe silvers or maybe whatever else. You open with action, 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 action. At some point, you can either on purpose or because you've drawn too many terminals, have too many terminals, and just instead of buying a card, trash it for this, and it's just 4 money. 4 money on one card is good for a money deck. It's very good. And you need to not be too over terminaled. So I'm thinking it maybe you have a couple of terminals and you can turn one of them into this, or you just open double terminal, and then if they collide, you turn one into this, and you're not sad at all. And if they don't collide, you're quite happy. You're probably hitting 5 and stuff. So that's the first big use for this card. Or you're gonna end up with getting some cantrippy things, and then like you just open like garbage 2 cost, or chapel whatever, and as soon as you see the garbage, like just open beggar, right? And you're just saying, I'm going to open beggar and some other action. Well, as soon as I see the beggar, I'm just going to turn it into this. And this card would be a good 5 for a money deck, right? Just 4 money is a good 5 for a money deck. You're just going to buy a couple, I don't know, 2 or 3 cheap actions at the start of the game, turn them into animal fairs. You're going to have a huge shot of money early on, and that's going to help you buy some golds, maybe more of these. You got to worry about your terminal count and stuff. But some golds, maybe this works with Snowy Village, I don't know. You're just going to have your money density ramped up very quickly, and you're going to be able to use that to get to provinces fairly fast. And while I don't think that's going to be a particularly strong strategy, as far as money decks go, it's going to be something to really think about and consider. Um, so I think this is actually a card that helps money more than it helps other things, particularly because it's kind of hard for it to get the buy if you don't have other gaining stuff already going on. If you do, then maybe this is the only plus buy on the board, and this is not great as the only plus buy card, but it's fine. Anyway, I've talked a lot about this card, so let's move on to the next one, which is Kiln. Kiln is a 5 cost action, gives you 2 money, and it says the next time you play a card this turn, you may first gain a copy of it, which is incredibly powerful text, right? If we remember Disciple being one of the strongest cards there is right now, gaining a card for free that you're playing is really, really strong. Now, mostly what you want to be gaining in most cases is probably action cards that help your deck control. So, like, you play a lab after this, right? Um, then you get to gain a lab. Of course, for that to work, this is a little bit similar to the sheepdog conundrum. For that to work, you need to have played a village before this or have villagers and have drawn that card so that you can be able to play, right, you play a village, you play this, you play your other card. You're playing your payload earlier in the turn than you normally would. So that's something to work out and around. Because again, I think normally you're going to be wanting to gain some kind of non-terminal action or maybe some kind of draw card. Probably mostly some kind of non-terminal. So that is something to watch out for. But if you can manage to pull that off reasonably reliably, this card could be very, very good. The other thing, obviously, that's easy to gain with this is payload. Whether that payload be treasures or this is just the first terminal you play in a turn, and you play your other terminal payload afterwards. So, like, it can gain you an extra bridge or something of that nature fairly easily, because you just play this first and then you play the bridge. Bridge is probably not a great example because bridge, if this was just another bridge, is kind of almost already getting you to gaining the next bridge. This can't gain you victory cards except for estates with inheritance or mixed type victory actions like nobles. Um, so it's just helping you gain cards that are going to help your deck, right? Um, the easiest case probably to play after this is silver, where it gains you a silver, which is fine. Where it's very much like Explorer, which is just kind of fine. But the thing to note there is that, like for money decks, if I open silver, silver, do I really want to get this on turn 3? And here's what I am worried about. What I'm worried about is you draw this in a hand with a few coppers. Like you draw this, 3 coppers in an estate. You play this, you play your coppers, you must gain a, oh, it's you may first gain a copy of it. Then never mind, whatever, you don't have to gain the copper. You can gain the copper, I guess, but you won't. Never mind, forget all that. The order you play your treasures in is suddenly going to be more important, though, for some treasures where it normally didn't matter. If you want to gain a copper or a silver or a gold or whatever, you need to play that one first and then all the other ones later, including heirlooms and stuff like that. So do watch out for that. Um, yeah, so given that it's largely kind of floor level and Explorer, Explorer's not that great. It's probably easier to gain golds off this than it is to gain them off Explorer, although maybe not by that far. You really want to be gaining kind of like other actions and more preferably non-terminals, I think, in most cases. So that would mean kind of extra villages, or again, villagers that help you play this early in the turn, similar to Tormentor, where you want to get the imp. If there's something that lets you play the Tormentor first and then keep playing other stuff, then that helps. And then here, if there's something that lets you play the Kiln first and then play your other draw stuff, that's going to help as well. Where Kiln doesn't have to be the actual first card in the turn, it's going to be a little bit easier to get stuff off. I think this is a pretty strong card with that kind of support. If it's just gaining you payload, then it's okay, but it's not fantastic. Anyway, I've talked long enough about Kiln now as well, so let's move on to the last card in this set of cards, which is Barge. Barge says it's a 5-cost action duration, and it says either now or at the start of your next turn, plus 3 cards and a buy. So if you take the effect now, this card won't stay out. If you take the effect next turn, obviously you get it next turn. First of all, this is just 3 cards and a buy if you just always ignore the duration effect. It's just 3 cards and a buy. And that's a decent card for 5 cost. We've seen lots of 5 cost cards that give you plus 3 cards and some potential benefit, right? Margrave gives you a lot. Catacombs or Journeyman or Rabble give you a little bit. Patrol, right? Plus a buy is probably better than, say, the Rabble attack, usually, although it varies wildly. But it's probably better than the Rabble attack usually It's probably better than, I don't know, Patrol's effect of drawing you extra green cards usually. Journeyman Catacombs. I think like Patrol Journeyman Catacombs, if this card were always just now, you have to take the 3 cards in a buy. I think it would be kind of on the level of Journeyman Patrol Catacombs, better than Rabble, but somewhere in kind of that range. And that's a pretty good card. And the biggest thing that is against all those cards is that the effect is so common that needing that exact thing is not so great. But that's a really good card. Really good, pretty good. I don't know, it's good. You'd play it a lot. The buy would mean that you would be getting some of these a lot of the time because you're going to want plus buy at various points. And when it and the other Smithy variant is available, you're going to mix and match probably a lot because you don't need like 7 extra buys that often. Again, we talked about this with Animal Fair. Sometimes you can use those extra buys, but it's really the first couple of extra buys that are the most important, and it tends to fall off the efficacy of more extra buys after that. But this also has the duration effect, right? You can say, I'm going to take this later instead. That makes this card much stronger because, well, first of all, you can just add a bunch of these and taking the next. So taking the this turn effect is generally a stronger effect because now is more important than later, and because um, what am I trying to? Why am I trying to say here? Now is more important than later, and also it not staying out means you get to play it every turn, right? You get to play all your smithies every turn. You get to play your warbs every other turn. So typically, you're probably going to want to play most of these now as opposed to later, for the now effect as opposed to the later effect. But the ability to take the later effect gives you optionality. Optionality is great. Um, and it also can give you reliability slash consistency. So if you have overdraw, then taking some of having some overdraw and taking some of these for later um, gives you a huge amount of consistency to where uh, you know terminal or duration draw at the start of your turn allows you to do a lot of things. It allows you to make sure you're much more reliable in getting to your draw so that you can draw your whole deck again the next turn. So taking say you have 5 of these and you play 4 of them as the now effect and one of them as the later effect, that's going to be quite a consistent thing. And I think that's going to be fairly common that you're going to have, some number of these and use more of them for the now effect and then 1 to 2 for the duration effect to be very, very reliable. The other thing that you can do with this is to just try to pile up for one big turn. If you have a lot of these, you could try to draw a lot now. It's a little bit harder to do, just playing all of these every turn. The thing about the next turn effect is you don't have to draw this card the next turn, right? You don't have to play it, you don't get to play it, but you also don't have to draw it, you don't have to use your action. So if you're a bit action pinched, you can play some of these to set up your next turn. Or if like the trashing sucks and you're a bit draw pinched, you can do it that way as well, right? To where you're setting up with, maybe you play 1 or 2 to draw this turn so you can draw more of these, but you're mostly trying to get a bunch of durations in play, kind of like taking a large number of tokens off your Sinister plot to pop next turn. Um, I think this card's very good. I think it's generally worse than Wharf because it draws you fewer cards, worse than Margrave because the attack is better than the optionality, but it's kind of on the second tier, I think, of 5 cost terminal draw cards, and it should be pretty good. I guess I should also mention it probably works quite a bit better in money than a lot of those other options because you're going to play it for the duration effect a lot. Kind of like Haunted Woods works better in money because you're not drawing stuff dead. Here you can like choose to not draw stuff dead, so this works pretty well in money decks as like your one terminal, or money-ish kind of decks where you're playing like a bunch of cantrips and then use this as your terminal at the end, because it's kind of at the end, but you get it in the beginning of the next turn. There, I think it compares well, really more directly to Haunted Woods, where Haunted Woods itself is not that great. The plus buy might help you here, but yeah, if you're playing without villages, it's a way to get some draw um, without having to worry about drawing stuff dead in those kinds of decks. Haunted Woods is not a world beater there, but it's, fine. It's probably not as good for those decks as, well, it's certainly not as good for those decks as, say, Vault or Courtyard, but the big thing there is this card actively promotes you wanting to draw a lot of cards because the strongest thing with draw cards is chaining them. So if there's a village around, it very strongly promotes you trying to play it with a village. But if for some reason there's no village, then this suddenly looks better than a lot of other draw cards, terminal draw cards, in that you can play it at the end and you're fine. Probably a bit weaker than Haunted Woods in most of those cases, but I don't know. Say there's a ton of cantrips that you can get that are very good. I don't know. Even just Peddler, right? There's Peddler around. You play this as the duration. You play, I don't know, some other cantrip, and then suddenly your Peddlers, you have extra buys for them, and you're drawing more cards, and you can find more Peddlers easier and start to pile the Peddlers a lot more easily with this than, I don't know, some other stuff. I don't think that's much of the strength of the card, but it's kind of like Haunted Woods. It's something the card can do, right? I think I'd rather have the attack in those non-village cases usually than the plus buy, but this isn't like totally worse in those cases. But mostly you want to use it as a draw card. Mostly you want to draw now with most of these and maybe have a small number of them to draw later for reliability. But at which point it's pretty good. Smithies are good cards. I think that'll do it for this edition of Scalding Hot Takes. Tomorrow we're going to see some new kinds of cards, I think. Horses or knights, not knights, horses or ways, I think are coming up in the next couple of days. And then landscapes, and then just more cards. Um, so this is the Scalding Hot Takes. At some point later, probably after the actual set is fully out, I will do some more in-depth analysis to where I look at the math on some of this stuff, and that will probably be in an episode of Making Luck. So check out Adam Horton's YouTube channel for that once the set releases, but that's going to be, I don't know, 3 weeks or something probably before we get to that. Anyway, you can check back tomorrow with my Scalding Hot Takes on the next set of things from this set which will be released, and every day for the rest of this week. When the set releases, I'm going to do Scalding Hot Takes on everything that wasn't previewed. And yeah, you can look forward to all the rest of this stuff that I'm talking about. But get in the comments section. Tell me what you think of these cards. Did I miss something glaring? Did I miss something obvious? Is one of these cards busted? Is one of these cards completely sucky? Is my evaluation totally wrong? I would love to discuss it with you in the comments section. So leave your comments, leave your thoughts. Let's get the discussion going. And we'll catch you again tomorrow with some more Scalding Hot Takes. This is WanderingWinder signing off.